The boardroom of Hale Enterprises towered above the city, encased in glass that reflected the setting sun. Inside, it was a temple of power, polished mahogany tables stretching the length of the room, leather chairs occupied by the most powerful executives in the company, and a CEO whose presence alone commanded silence. Victoria Hale sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her dark hair pulled tightly into a bun, her tailored suit an unspoken reminder of her authority. Every eye turned to her with the kind of reverence born not from admiration, but from fear. She thrived on it. The quarterly meeting had dragged on for hours, with presentations, projections, and endless numbers. Victoria had little patience for inefficiency. Her sharp voice had cut through the jargon of her executives more than once, her sarcastic remarks leaving one or two visibly rattled. Yet she relished it. Control was her oxygen. As the meeting reached a lull, her eyes, sharp and searching, drifted away from the suited figures around her table to the lone man in the corner. He was quiet, unobtrusive, almost invisible in his gray uniform. Ethan Miles, the janitor, stood with a mop bucket and cleaning rags, waiting for the room to empty before he could do his work. He did not fidget, did not seem bored, did not shrink from their presence like most employees did in front of the board. He simply stood, watchful, patient. That small defiance of indifference caught her attention. Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. A smile touched her lips, the kind of smile that had sent many competitors into ruin. "You know," she began casually, her voice carrying across the room with deliberate ease, "my father used to say that a man was measured not only by his business sense, but also by his ability to appreciate and master art. He believed the two were inseparable, discipline and artistry, steel and silk." The board members glanced at one another uncertainly. They knew better than to interrupt her when she was weaving one of her little parables. She continued, her voice tinged with nostalgia but her eyes glinting with something sharper. "My father loved Chopin. He said, if a man could play Chopin, he could win any woman's heart. Imagine that, romantic and brilliant in equal measure." A low murmur of amusement rippled through the room. Some chuckled politely, some shifted uncomfortably, unsure where she was heading. Victoria's gaze returned to the janitor, who had remained perfectly still, meeting her eyes with calmness that unsettled her just a little. Her smile widened, more predatory now. "Tell you what," she said suddenly, her tone carrying the weight of both jest and command. "If you can play Chopin, Mr. Janitor, I'll marry you." The reaction was instantaneous. The boardroom erupted in laughter. Executives whispered, some outright guffawed, leaning toward one another to exchange mocking remarks. The idea of a janitor, someone paid to clean up after their corporate messes, sitting at a piano and producing Chopin of all things, it was too absurd to take seriously. One man at the table, red-faced from laughter, muttered under his breath, "Maybe he can mop to the rhythm." The joke earned more snickers. Victoria allowed herself a soft laugh as well, savoring the moment of humiliation she had crafted. Her eyes never left Ethan's, watching, expecting a flush of embarrassment, a stammered excuse, maybe even a retreat from the room. That was what most would do when spotlighted under her cruel game. But Ethan did none of those things. He stood silently, his expression unchanged, his eyes steady, clear, and disturbingly unshaken. The laughter began to fade when they realized he was not playing along, not shrinking under the weight of the mockery. Victoria tilted her head, tapping her manicured nails against the arm of her chair. "Come now, surely you've touched a piano before," she pressed, her voice mocking, laced with false sweetness. "Or is that far too refined for someone who cleans floors?" A few of the executives chuckled nervously, but the air had shifted. The room wasn't quite as amused as it had been moments earlier. Something about his silence unnerved them. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was low but resonant, carrying a calm authority that clashed with the image of a janitor. "Careful, Ms. Hale." His eyes didn't waver from hers. "Sometimes the people you dismiss carry the very music you've been searching for." The room stilled as though the air itself had been sucked out. No one laughed. The smirk on Victoria's face faltered, just slightly, but enough for those closest to her to notice. She tried to mask it quickly, straightening in her chair, her lips parting as if to respond, but no clever retort came to her. The board members exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The man who had joked about, mopping to the rhythm, cleared his throat awkwardly and looked down at his notes. Ethan didn't flinch under the weight of their stares. He didn't smirk or smile or seem smug. He simply held her gaze as if he were the one seated at the head of the table, as if he were the one who had just silenced a room full of powerful executives with a single sentence. For the first time in years, Victoria felt a flicker of uncertainty, of curiosity that bordered on disquiet. Who was this man, standing in a janitor's uniform with such composure, such conviction in his tone? And what did he mean by carrying the music she'd been searching for? The silence dragged, heavy and uncomfortable. Victoria finally exhaled, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said briskly, turning her attention back to the board as if dismissing the entire exchange, "let's not waste any more time. We have numbers to finalize." The meeting resumed, but it had lost its edge. The executives' voices wavered, their focus fractured. Even Victoria, as she scrawled notes in her leather-bound planner, found her mind circling back to Ethan's words, replaying them over and over. In the corner of the room, Ethan remained still, his presence no longer invisible. He was no longer just a janitor in their eyes. He had become a question mark, a riddle wrapped in the guise of humility. And though the meeting concluded with the usual signatures and decisions, none of them could shake the quiet power of the man with the mop. When the boardroom finally emptied, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and expensive paper, Ethan began his work. He mopped the floor methodically, the swish of the mop echoing in the vast room. But if one had listened closely, they might have noticed the rhythm of his movements, steady, deliberate, almost like the cadence of a nocturne. And if Victoria Hale had paused at the doorway instead of sweeping past with her entourage, she might have noticed the way his lips moved silently, as if mouthing notes only he could hear. But she didn't. Not yet. The building was nearly empty by the time Victoria returned to her office that evening. Most of the executives had already gone home, retreating to their penthouses and country clubs, leaving the tower unusually quiet. The night had wrapped the city in velvet darkness, and only the grid of glowing windows below hinted at the life still moving in the streets. Victoria leaned back in her leather chair, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A glass of wine rested in her hand, the crimson liquid catching the faint light of her desk lamp. It had been an exhausting day, though not for the reasons she admitted out loud. The quarterly meeting was standard, predictable, but the janitor's words still replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't shake. Sometimes the people you dismiss carry the very music you've been searching for. She had spent years in boardrooms, facing down competitors, silencing arrogant men twice her age with a single calculated phrase. Yet she couldn't shake the unsettling calm of a janitor who looked her in the eyes without flinching, who turned her mockery into something that cut deeper than she expected. His composure had been disarming, his tone carrying a weight she couldn't explain. Victoria swirled the wine in her glass, irritated at herself. Why was she even thinking about him? He was a janitor, a nobody. His life revolved around cleaning floors, not playing music or mastering art. She had only been making a point, weaving one of her usual power games. But instead of being embarrassed, he had thrown her own words back at her and left her speechless. She stood abruptly, crossing the room in her heels, her reflection tall and commanding in the glass walls. She should dismiss the entire incident as irrelevant. Yet the silence of the office seemed to echo with his voice, with that strange warning wrapped in humility. Then it happened. A sound, soft at first, so faint she almost thought it was her imagination. Notes drifting down the hallway like threads of smoke. She froze, her heart skipping, listening harder. It wasn't her imagination. A piano. Someone was playing the piano. And not just playing. The melody swelled, rich and layered, filled with longing that seemed to seep into the very walls of the building. It was Chopin. She recognized it instantly. She had grown up with those nocturnes, her father insisting they were the highest form of beauty. He would play them in the evenings when she was a girl, teaching her to sit still and listen, telling her that Chopin carried the secrets of the human soul in every note. The sound pulled her out of her office like a magnet. She set her glass down, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors as she followed the music down the long, dimly lit corridor. Each step quickened as the melody grew clearer, swelling with emotion so raw it pierced through her carefully constructed composure. When she reached the grand lobby, she stopped at the edge of the marble stairs. The chandelier above bathed the room in golden light, casting long shadows across the vast space. And there, seated at the grand piano that had served as little more than decoration for years, was Ethan. His janitor's uniform seemed out of place under the chandeliers, his mop and bucket abandoned nearby. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, the uniform ceased to matter. His hands moved with a grace and precision that only years of devotion could teach. Every note shimmered with control and passion, the kind that could only come from someone who had lived inside music, who had given it more than practice, who had given it a piece of his soul. Victoria gripped the railing, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen virtuosos play in concert halls, flown across the world for recitals in Vienna and Paris, but what she was hearing now was different. This was not polished performance for applause. This was confession. This was truth. The nocturne rose and fell like waves, trembling with tenderness one moment and crashing with anguish the next. His eyes were closed as he played, his body swaying slightly, as though the music had carried him to another place. And in that moment, Victoria realized the cruel irony. The man she mocked, the man she dismissed, had just reached into the heart of her father's most treasured words and made them real. When the final chord dissolved into silence, the lobby seemed to hold its breath. Ethan lifted his hands from the keys slowly, letting the last vibrations fade into nothing. He opened his eyes and turned his head, meeting Victoria's gaze across the distance. Her lips parted, but no words came. The CEO who had silenced countless rooms with her presence now stood wordless, exposed. She descended the stairs slowly, her heels echoing against the marble. "You asked for Chopin," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying easily in the vast lobby. "Does your promise still stand?" The question hung in the air, sharp yet gentle. Victoria stopped a few feet from the piano, her heart pounding. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. She thought back to the boardroom, to her smirk, to the laughter of the executives. She remembered the cruel way she had thrown the challenge at him, never expecting anything but humiliation. And here he was, delivering not just Chopin, but Chopin that made her chest ache. Her pride screamed at her to laugh it off, to dismiss him again, to reassert control. But something in his eyes, calm, unwavering, unashamed, stopped her. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't gloating. He was simply asking, reminding her of her own words. She sat down on the edge of the piano bench opposite him, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the instrument. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Ethan looked at the keys for a long moment before answering. "It's not something I learned in a classroom. It's something I lived. My mother was a pianist. She taught me before she passed. Music was all we had for a long time. It kept us alive when everything else fell apart." His fingers grazed the keys lightly, almost absent-mindedly. "I play because it's the only language I never lose." Victoria felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to feel sympathy, didn't want to feel anything, but his words disarmed her. They cut through the armor she had built around herself for years. She looked away, her eyes landing on the chandelier above. "You've been here all this time. Cleaning floors, emptying trash. And you can do this." Her voice was part disbelief, part awe. Ethan shrugged slightly. "Not every gift fits neatly into the world. Sometimes it has to hide until someone cares enough to listen." The words stung. She had mocked him, dismissed him, treated him as less than human. And yet here he was, showing her a kind of beauty she had almost forgotten existed. She wanted to say something sharp, something to regain her balance, but the truth was she had none. For the first time in her career, she was the one silenced. The silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean what I said in there." Ethan's gaze softened, but he didn't look away. "I know, but it's not about what you meant. It's about what you revealed." Her breath caught again. He was right. She had revealed her arrogance, her cruelty, her blindness. And yet, instead of holding it against her, he had answered with music. Victoria rose from the bench, stepping back, her pulse racing. She didn't know what unsettled her more, that he had silenced her, or that part of her wanted to hear him play again. "You've given me a lot to think about," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan nodded, returning his gaze to the keys. "That's what music is meant to do. As she turned and walked back toward the stairs, the sound of his fingers brushing the piano began again, softer this time, a melody that seemed to follow her with every step. She clutched the railing tighter, trying to steady herself. She was Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Enterprises, the woman who bent empires to her will. And, yet, tonight, she felt like a child again, listening to Chopin in her father's study, realizing that power wasn't always measured in money or titles. Sometimes, it was measured in music. And the man who carried that music was someone she could no longer dismiss.